Well, I want to welcome everyone to the Legal Women Voters of Dane County's Forum on Connecting Rural and Urban Communities. And for those of you who participated in the pre-forum chat, thank you very much. I'm Martha Stanford, the program director of our league. The Legal Women Voters is a grassroots organization of women and men who are dedicated to empowering voters to defend and strengthen our democracy. Hence, we are political, but nonpartisan, working for our community's voters, not candidates or parties. Next slide. Today's forum will be on connecting our rural and urban communities in order to better understand how to implement good government that works for all of our citizens. The members of our league wanted to better understand how living in a relatively urban area compares with living in rural areas. So we asked our expert speakers gathered today to help us better understand and expand our awareness of the issues involved. Next slide. As we begin our program, let us start with this land acknowledgement. League formation began more than a century ago in 1920 with women's suffrage, but nearly 2 centuries ago, even prior to the 1848 creation of the state of Wisconsin, the 1832 treaty forced Ho-Chunk to secede their territory of the Jops or Four Lakes. Both the federal and state government repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. Truth and acknowledgement are critical for building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. We continue this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. In Dane County, we are all standing on the stolen ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk people. We pay respect to the elders, past, present, and future. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us here today. The League of Women Voters is grateful for the past, present, and future guidance of Wisconsin's Native nations. Slide. If you're not yet a member of the League of Women Voters, you are welcome to join. Joining a local league provides many volunteer opportunities to serve your community, as well as a chance to meet fellow community members. We help our fellow citizens register to vote, as well as learn about what our community is voting on, from candidate forums to programs like this one, exploring current issues that our communities face locally, statewide, and nationally. We also advocate for good government issues when we can come to a consensus. Next slide. Our government, our league has many events coming up, from a discussion about this forum next week to social gatherings for lunch, to chances for members to learn how and then help register voters, as well as attend local, statewide, and national gatherings during which our members decide on the future of our organization. Our members are encouraged to attend either in person or virtually our annual meeting, but they can also participate in the upcoming statewide annual meeting and even a national convention this year if they register this week. If you want to be one of our delegates for the national convention, just let us know. Next slide. If you're a member of our league, I want to encourage you to get involved. It would not only be a chance for us to get to know you, but also for you to serve your community and utilize or learn and practice leadership skills. We have many tasks, both big and small, that we could use your help with. Next slide. If you appreciate learning about current events, please consider helping us set up the next program forums by joining one of our program groups. Our September forum will be on what steps are being taken to protect our upcoming election and what we can do to make sure our votes are counted. This will be followed in December by a forum focusing on considering what priorities we should best focus on to improve our democracy, serve our voters, and strengthen our rule of law. In the winter, we will be addressing artificial intelligence, from exploring what it is to laws that would best harness this new technology so it serves our community. We'll end our program year by considering how best to educate our children, especially in addressing current educational inequities. There are many ways you can serve one or more of these working groups. We have both small and large tasks that need volunteers. Please let us know your interest by emailing program@lwvdanecounty.org. Next slide. And even if you're not a league member, we still want you to participate in our democracy by voting in this year's upcoming elections, both the August primary election and November's general election. Your vote is your voice. Next slide. And now it's time to get to the topic that we've all gathered here today for. To moderate our discussion, we're delighted to have Rochelle Wilson, who works for the Wisconsin Public Radio. She is currently the producer of Wisconsin Today, a statewide talk show covering stories about news, people, and culture of Wisconsin. She's been a university instructor, a managing editor for a digital magazine, and producer of several podcasts. So we are in good hands. Rochelle, thank you very much for being our moderator for today's forum on how to connect rural and urban communities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marty. And to everyone who's here, thank you so much for attending. It's great to see that attendance number jumping up, and it's wonderful to have you all. I was able to read in the chat about some of you, so we're excited to bring this to you and to field your questions. And to that point, we are going to be saving the Q&A for the end. So we will hear from each of our three panelists before we turn to the Q&A. You're still welcome to direct your questions to any of the panelists in particular, but that's just the order of events that we'll be doing things. So keep your questions in mind. We'd love to see many of them come in. So our first presenter today is David Egan Robertson. He's a demographer emeritus with the UW-Madison Applied Population Laboratory, where he produced both local and national demographic analyses, estimates, and projections for more than 25 years. We're so grateful to have David with us. And David, welcome.
Well, I want to say welcome, everyone. I hope to, in this evening's presentation, I hope to give you some indication of the similarities and contrasts between Wisconsin's urban and rural areas. Time's short, I only have about 15 minutes. I won't be able to cover a lot, but I just want to bring out some interesting comparisons that have caught my eye as an applied demographer. Now, I'll be displaying a lot of numbers and charts in this presentation. I hope, unlike this slide, the numbers will not do you in. If you want to study the numbers more thoroughly, this presentation will be posted on the League's website. In a short presentation like this, what I'm hoping to do is just create impressions for you about population change in the state and similarities and contrasts between urban and rural areas. I'd like to start first with just a few slides describing population change for the entire state to provide some statewide context. This chart here shows growth of the state since 1990 through 2025. So over these 35 years, as you look at this graph, again, don't worry too much about the numbers. We were a little under 5 million in 1990, and the state's population is just under 6 million at this point, is estimated by the Census Bureau. What you might notice as you look at the bars across time is the increase in height is slowing down. The last bar in a red or orange color there only covers 5 years, but it's indicating a pattern. I'll explain in a few slides about the reasons for this slowing growth pattern. Just to give you also a sense of the state's growth compared to the country over the last 35 years. So the US population has grown by more than a third over those 35 years. State of Wisconsin has grown a little more than 1/5 since 1990. So our growth has been slower than the national pattern. But actually, in terms of our neighbors here in the Midwest, Wisconsin, actually, its population growth is not has held up reasonably well. The state that has grown the fastest is Minnesota. They've added about 33%, so kind of close to the national pattern. As you can see, Wisconsin is in second place, adding 22% over the last 35 years. Iowa's added 16%, Illinois 11%, Michigan 9%. So even though our growth is slower compared to the national pattern, compared to our nearest neighbors here in the upper Midwest, growth has been pretty decent. So what's behind these changes? I'm going to just take a slide here to do a basic applied demography lesson. So there's several broad measures of population change that we focus on, and demographers call this components of population change. First, as you can imagine, births add to the population and deaths clearly subtract from the population. So the difference between births and deaths is what we call natural change. Sometimes, some years it can be positive, some years it can be negative. For example, back during the early years of the COVID pandemic, Wisconsin had negative natural change, and we had a lot of company, of course, with other states. The other component is migration. The people moving in and moving out. So it's a net number in effect. And again, so this also could be positive or negative. So there are these two broad components, natural change and migration, that generate the numeric change in population in an area across time. So just to look at Wisconsin's pattern in terms of these two components, the natural change and the net migration, in this graph, again, starting in 1990, coming forward 35 years, you can see the green part of the bars, that is the natural change. You can see that held fairly steady through the 90s and 2000s, but then it started to tail off in the 2010s. And in fact, in the last 5 years, natural change has only mounted to about 1,000 in a positive direction, so plus 1,000. The orange parts of the bars here, orange or red, depending on the color on your screen, you can see there's net migration was quite high in the 90s, and that slowed down through the 2000s and 2010s. But that's actually picked up again here in the first 5 years of the 2020s. But you can see, particularly in the last 5 years, the big picture is that nearly all the state's growth has been due to more people moving in and out. And it's likely that population growth in the future, if there is any, is going to depend on that positive contribution of net migration. So now I'll talk some about rural and urban statistics. You'll read, a lot of popular articles, newspaper articles, whatever, to talk about rural America and urban America. And with the help here of Inigo Montoya from the Princess Bride film, defining rural and by contrast urban areas for assembling demographic data and other statistics are malleable. There are two broad definitions created largely by the Census Bureau in an attempt to distinguish between metropolitan or urban populations and from non-metropolitan or rural populations. So the first common way, particularly looking at below a state level, is to divide up the state's counties by their metropolitan and non-metropolitan status. There's a standard national definition of metropolitan areas. There's a core of densely settled population of at least 50,000 people, and then also outlying counties that more than 25% of workers commute to work in the central county. So while metropolitan and non-metropolitan status of counties provides stability across time, because county boundaries generally in the country do not change, it's not a completely satisfying definition process. I've circled here the Madison Metropolitan Statistical Area. This is, again, based off Census Bureau work. It's actually the Federal Office of Management and Budget that issues metropolitan and non-metropolitan status after every census. So the Madison metro area actually includes Columbia, Iowa, and Greene counties. And as we know, if you drive west towards Dodgeville or south towards Monroe or north towards Portage, it looks very rural. So this isn't um, in some ways not the best way, although it's very consistent across time, looking at a difference between metropolitan and non-metropolitan populations. What the Census Bureau does also do, they have a second definition of urban and rural areas, and it may actually provide a truer picture of the state's urban and rural population. So again, I've enlarged the Madison metro area here, and you can see in purple or blue, depending on what your screen is showing, you can see how very little land is actually defined as urban. And statewide, in fact, the Census Bureau delineates nearly 97% of Wisconsin's land as rural, meaning only 3% is urban. Rural areas, however, only contain about 1/3 of the state's population, meaning 2/3 of the state's population is crammed into 3% of the land, so to speak. In this case, looking at the counties here in the Madison metro area, you can see Iowa County, for example, other than Dodgeville, is nearly 100% rural, very similar with Greene County, Columbia County, very much the same. Even Dane County, which, we think of as having very large metropolitan area now, particularly with the growing suburbs, even Dane County is about 86% rural in terms of land area. But a drawback to this using urban and rural areas is that they usually change after each census, so time series analyses can be hazardous. So in the remainder of the presentation, when I want to cite trends, I'll rely on the metro and non-metro status of counties. And then for more recent statistics, more of a snapshot view, I'll rely on the urban and rural definitions. All right, so how does population change look by the metro non-metro definition? Metro counties have grown from about 3.6 million up to about 4.5 million over the past 35 years, or about 24%. Non-metros have grown from 1.3 million to about 1.5 million, or 17%. So metropolitan counties, not terribly surprisingly, have grown at a slightly faster rate. In looking across time, actually the percentage growth in the 1990s in non-metropolitan counties was actually higher than in metropolitan counties in percentage terms. But when you looked across the 2000s and the 2010s, metro areas, their percent population growth was anywhere from 2 to 3 times higher than the non-metros. There's been a little bit of a change in the last 5 years since the 2020 census, where metro counties are still growing faster than non-metro, but the difference between the two categories is starting to shrink. And part of that gets back to what I was talking about earlier with the components of population change. In this chart, I'm showing the natural change, and then I'm showing migration both by domestic, which is within the U.S. Migration, and then international migration as well here on this slide. So in the first part of the graph, the natural change, you can see that in metro counties, there's been a positive natural change in the last 5 years, whereas in non-metro counties, it's negative. In fact, almost the reverse of the positive gains in metro counties. But then if you look at domestic migration, metro counties have actually lost some population in this component, whereas non-metro counties are actually gaining in migration, a positive net number about 26,000. And then international migration, as we might expect with metro counties, larger urban areas like Milwaukee and Madison, Green Bay, they're going to get more of a gain in international migrants. But even the number of 10,000 in non-metro counties is a solid gain for non-metro areas. So now let's probably the most distinguishing demographic characteristic, at least in Wisconsin, are the differences in the age distribution across urban and rural areas. It ends up factoring into other characteristics such as natural increase and decrease, as I illustrated on that previous slide, and things like race and ethnicity. So the broadest measure regarding age, a very common number you'll see in a lot of news articles, media articles, is median age. So it's the point at which one half of an area's population is below and one half is above. And perhaps not surprisingly, the median age for rural areas in Wisconsin is about 7 years greater than it is in urban areas. Nationally, the difference between urban and rural areas is about 5 years. So what's sort of contributing to this skew between urban and rural areas in Wisconsin? When we look at some of the more detail in terms of looking at the age distribution, and again, because time's kind of short, I can only use pretty much broad age groups here. So I'm looking at under 18, 18 to 64, and 65 and up. Interestingly, as a percentage, rural areas have a slightly higher proportion of young people than urban ones. In the traditional working age population of 18 to 64, the proportion is lower in rural areas than urban by more than 5 percentage points. And the population in 65 and over is about 4.5% higher in rural areas than urban. I also added a chart at the bottom here showing 20-year age ranges. You can look at this in more detail. And there is larger shares in rural areas of people 45 to 64 and 65 to 84. Looks like my time's running a little short here. Let's see. With the age distribution skewing older in rural areas, it's not surprising that the population there is whiter than in urban areas, as non-white communities tend to be younger than whites. The percent of the urban population that identifies as Hispanic is nearly 3 times that of the rural population, and more than 9 of 10 rural residents identify as whites compared to 7 of 10 in urban areas. And for other race categories, the only category where the percentage is higher in rural areas is for Native Americans. Education is another indicator here. And again, actually, in terms of high school graduation, the percentage of people in rural areas with a high school graduate degree or higher is actually greater in rural areas than in urban, but there is a difference in bachelor's degrees and higher. And again, this ends up, I thought maybe because the population was older, might be a reason for fewer people with college degrees, but actually it's actually a pattern across every age group that in urban areas, a higher percentage have a 4-year college degree or higher. And labor force participation actually is fairly equal across urban and rural areas. When we look at breakouts by age, again, very, very similar across urban and rural areas in terms of the percent of the population working in the labor force. And finally, the Wisconsin poverty levels, you might think rural areas would have a higher poverty rate, but actually the poverty rate for rural areas in Wisconsin is about 4 percentage points lower than it is in the urban areas of the state. And again, percent of renters paying 30% of income for rent is a higher percentage in urban areas. It's sort of considering 30% or more is sort of considered as rent burden households. So nearly half in urban areas are paying 30% or more of their income for rent. It's only about 37, 38% for rural areas. So I'll stop there for the next speaker. I hope I could provide you with a glimpse of similarities and differences between the state's urban and rural populations. I'll do my best to respond to any questions during the Q&A period.
Excellent. David, thank you so much. It's just so interesting to look at those numbers. And if I may, a shameless plug, David appeared on our show, Wisconsin Today, earlier this year with our host, Rob Ferret, to talk about Wisconsin's aging population. So this is my shameless plug that you can always visit us at WPR.org to see the stories that we're telling from around the state. And including you could look up David's name and find that story about some of those numbers of Wisconsin's aging population. So thank you so much, David. We're going to turn to our next panelist now, Mike McCabe. Mike McCabe has been a farmhand, journalist, educator, and political reform advocate in Wisconsin. He led the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign for 15 years and later founded the grassroots group Blue Jean Nation. He's the author of the novel Miracles Along County Q and currently writes weekly posts on Substack. Mike, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Rochelle, and hello, everybody. I'm so glad that so many decided to join us for this discussion. Appreciate you jumping on the webinar. One of the things that Rochelle didn't mention in her introduction was that I'm a farm kid. I was born and raised on my family's dairy farm, and come from a family background. But I have now lived more years in the city than I ever did in the country. So I have the blessing, I think, of having lived across the rural-urban divide with a foot in both worlds. And so I've been asked tonight to focus on a question about what problems are shared by rural and urban communities and what problems are different between rural and urban places. And when I think about what problems are shared, it's really all of the major challenges that we face as a society. It starts with being able to make a living. Jobs and economic security are right there at the top of the list, whether you're living in the country or whether you're living in the city. Healthcare is obviously a huge concern. That problem manifests itself somewhat differently in rural areas as opposed to urban areas, but it's a big concern no matter where you live. Housing is a major issue, both in terms of affordability and availability. Then there's the whole technology sphere. It's AI and data centers and internet access and all of those kinds of things that I think both rural and urban people are challenged by those issues. Also, social stratification, and under that heading, I would talk about social injustice and social isolation, loneliness. That has people think everybody in the city living in such close proximity that how can you possibly be lonely? But there is tremendous isolation and loneliness even in those settings. And so that really brings me to one of the major issues that we face in our society, and that's mental health. Among farmers, the suicide rate is now at record levels, and mental health challenges are profound in rural communities, but also, when you think about the homelessness problem that primarily is an urban problem, so much of that traces back to issues of mental health. And then, of course, there's the environment and pollution. And people think of cities, and the real big cities with maybe smog and compromised air and water quality. But in the country too, people think that in the country there's clean living, but I have extended family in Kewaunee County, for example. They've farmed there for years. And I've personally seen with my own eyes people turning on a water faucet, and what comes out is the color of apple cider. And it smells like cow manure. And so there are people who face really severe environmental challenges. look, whether you live in the city or in the country, everybody wants their kids to go to good schools. They want to be able to make a living. They want a place to live. They want to be able to afford to buy their own home, all of those things. When I think about what's unique to rural communities, the one thing that jumps to mind for me is access. And when I talk about that, I really talk about the unavailability of services. I mentioned healthcare as a shared challenge. Well, in rural areas, the one of the particular problems that's becoming really acute is that rural hospitals are closing left and right, one after another. And so people may not, if they're in need of going to a health clinic or a hospital, they may not have one anywhere near them, and that's a huge challenge. So, I think that's one of the challenges that sticks out to me in terms of that's unique to rural areas. And then ones that are unique to city life, I think of the word congestion. I think rural folks often think that the unique problem in urban areas is crime. But I'll tell you, living in the city, people don't think about crime on a daily basis, but they do think about traffic on a daily basis. They are at wit's end sometimes about traffic. But congestion, even goes beyond traffic. It's people living in close proximity, and sometimes they get on each other's nerves, and there's tensions and problems that come from that. That's really unique to urban areas, because in the country, there's a heck of a lot more space between us. When you think about the list I've come up with, both of shared problems and then unique problems, you might notice that I mentioned more problems that are shared than are unique, and I think that's the reality. We have a heck of a lot more in common than what separates us, and I think we often don't appreciate that. But I'll tell you this: I think the biggest shared problem we have, the biggest source of division between rural and urban communities, is actually something that we have in common. The biggest shared problem is mythology. It's the misconceptions that urban and rural folks have about each other. Rural people see the urban setting and they see city folk in a particular way. They see urban life as crowded. They see it as fast. They see it as dangerous or violent. And they also see it, the word I would use is fancy. Now, city people might say, well, that they might think of it as modern or sort of up to date. But the word I would use that rural folks think when they think of city people is they're fancy. Now, urban people, on the other hand, see rural areas as homogeneous, slow, behind, even backward, old-fashioned, and so I think one of the things that really hits home about this to me, as somebody who's lived across the rural-urban divide, has lived in both settings, is that much of this is mythology. Both urban and rural places are not monolithic. They are complicated. Not everybody's the same in either place. But yet you still run into this common characterization that you hear all the time, that in the city, nobody knows their neighbors. And in the country, everyone knows each other. And, there's actually a line in that novel that Rochelle mentioned of mine, Miracles Along County Q. There's a line there. A curious thing about small towns. There are a few places where it's harder to hide, but not many where it's easier to keep secrets. Everybody thinks everybody knows everybody. Everybody's wrong. That idea that everybody knows everything about everybody in a small town, that's not the case at all. They may know where everybody lives. They may know their name. They may have an idea where you work and all that kind of stuff, but they don't know what's going on inside everybody's house, and they don't know the challenges that everybody's facing. And there is social stratification. There are people who are well off, and there are people who are really struggling, and there are people who look down on other people. All of that is a reality. So to me, one of the realities we have to come to terms with if we're going to be serious about connecting rural and urban communities is that neither city nor country life is monolithic. Both are ever changing. There is not one urban culture, but many. There is not one rural culture, but many. The difference between small town life and farm life is significant. And most rural people live in small towns. They don't live on farms. I think about the demographics of rural areas. Little town I grew up outside of, Curtis. At the time I was young, it was all white. Today it's a majority minority community. It's majority Latino. So that community is ever changing. I think about the city people I know. A lot of them used to live in the country, but they moved for better job opportunities, economic opportunity. And I know a lot of country folk who are now, living in the city. I know city people who are living in the country, and that has had a big impact on our politics. Our politics are not static either. Our politics are constantly evolving. I think about Clark County, which is where Curtis is. When I was young, the area was represented by Democrats. The congressman for the area was Dave Obey, a Democrat. The state senator was Tom Harnish, another Democrat. When I was very young, the assembly representative was Frank Nicolay, one of the most progressive Democrats to ever serve in Wisconsin's legislature. And then in 2016, Donald Trump won Clark County by over 30 percentage points. And in 2024, he won by over 40 percentage points. And a lot of people I've talked to say, well, they're voting the way they're voting because of race. They're all, they're bigots. Well, if the voting behavior is explained by bigotry, I would say, how do you explain 2008 and 2012 when Barack Obama won something like 36 or 37 counties in Wisconsin out of the 72? A lot of those were rural counties. And how do you, if it's bigotry that explains the voting, how do you explain Tammy Baldwin, again, also winning close to 40 Wisconsin counties when she won a U.S. Senate seat? And so if it's bigotry that's motivating them, how do why did they vote for the out lesbian? Rural politics is a lot more complicated than that. And I think a lot of it comes down to frustration, exasperation, and resentment that comes from, hey, there are rural communities that are digging up paved roads and putting down gravel because they can't afford to fill the potholes anymore. Well, if they go to the city, they resent seeing all the interchanges and the traffic circles and all of that. And they think, well, that's where all my gas tax money's going, and none of it's coming back to us because we can't even afford to fill our potholes. And that leads them to say, well, wait a second, if government's not going to work for us, then let's blow it up, or I'm going to vote for the party that wants the smallest government, and that makes the Republican Party their current default option. When our country has thrived, and when the rural-urban divide has been successfully bridged, it's when we make a commitment as a nation to do community building across those rural-urban boundaries. I think of something like rural electrification. There's just no way a power company ever would have strung power lines down every back road to every farmhouse and every barn. No private company would have gone to that expense to pick up a few extra customers. It took a national effort. It took an effort to make something as fundamental as electricity available to every American. And so when we stick together and we all invest in solving urban problems as well as all coming together to solve rural problems, that's when we end up being, I think, most stable as a society and most successful in bridging these kinds of divisions. And I think that opportunity is in front of us, that the opportunity to think beyond our own backyards and think about how we can build our state and build our country across these divisions that we make such a big deal about, those divisions will start to melt away, and that will have a huge effect on our politics. It's why so many rural voters at one point were Democrats. They were voting for Democrats because they saw things like rural electrification dramatically change their communities and their way of life. And that kind of thing can happen today if we apply that same sort of approach to 21st century problems. So I'm going to stop there, kick it back to Rochelle, and thanks again for joining this call. I look forward to hearing your questions and continuing this discussion.
Mike, thank you so much. We really appreciate your remarks. And yes, I should say for attendees, I've had to truncate these bios pretty significantly. So you're hearing from folks who really run the gamut on the experience that they have. And I'm really excited for the Q&A and to hear more from all of them. So thank you so much, Mike. Same goes here for our next speaker, Sarah Lloyd. Sarah Lloyd farms with her husband, Nels Nelson, in Wisconsin Dells. She works off farm as a value chain coordinator for the UMN Forever Green Initiative and the UW-Madison Grassland 2.0 project. She also works with the Wisconsin Food Hub Cooperative, a farmer-led co-op owned by the farmers and the Wisconsin Farmers Union. Sarah holds a PhD in rural sociology from UW-Madison and a master's in rural development from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. She's active in the Wisconsin Farmers Union, serving as president of the Columbia County chapter. She's also the president of the board of the Worm Farm Institute. Sarah, we're so grateful and lucky to have you this evening. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. This is great, and it was great.
Oh, Sarah, I am having a hard time. It looks like your feed may be interrupted. Perhaps you can turn off your video feed to help us hear your audio.
Okay. Oh, I am sorry about that. I'm having a rural internet
Yes.
issue because I got notified that my satellite internet was unstable, and that's not doing the trick. Is the audio okay right now?
It improved and then had a little glitch. So why don't we have you continue and I will flag you and stop if we need to kind of reset again.
Okay. Thank you. And I apologize. This is the reality of actually living in a rural area. Like Mike said, what are the services that we are making available to everyone? And I actually live in a place where I do not have any choice other than a satellite internet or trying to use a hotspot. So I don't, but my sister lives a half away, and she has the rural telephone company's high-speed internet, but I can't get that because I'm in Alliant Energy territory and Frontier. Anyways, but I think it's true that we do see these differences in what's available for people and their ability to kind of pursue economic and social lives. And that's what I kind of wanted to talk about. I am a value chain coordinator, which sounds sort of mysterious. I work on supply chains. I really think of in crops and products. But then what happens to them and who those relationships processing that product of food or fiber.
Oh, Sarah, we're having some glitches again. I am sending you the phone number and I'm wondering if we might take a pause to see, do you think your phone connection could be stronger?
It might be. I apologize very much for this.
That's all right. I
I
want to
can
make sure
certainly
that
try.
we're here.
Yeah. Do you question and answer? And as I try to figure this out.
Yeah, I'm happy to take the floor for a sec. So we'll let Sarah run some technical interference here. And that to give her the full amount of time, I think we could actually start with the first question that I'm seeing in the Q&A, and we can return to this later so Sarah can weigh in as well. But perhaps, David, are you at the ready potentially to take a quick question? Okay. Looks like maybe David is not with us right now. So we're gonna just give a pause and wait for Sarah to join. Just a reminder though that you can send your questions to the Q&A. If you go to the bottom of your Zoom and kind of at the center right, you should see a Q&A box. You should be able to type a question there. And I think we'll hopefully be able to get to everything tonight. So don't be shy. Be thinking about some questions that you have for Mike, David, and Sarah. And I think between all of these panelists, we can have a really lively discussion. So I'll be monitoring the chat, but mostly we'll be monitoring that Q&A. So if you have something that you want to make sure we pick up on tonight, that's the best place to put it. All right. We're gonna still wait for Sarah to be calling in here. David, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, apologies. We're waiting on Sarah. There was a little bit of technical difficulties, and so I thought we might do kind of a quick preview of the Q&A to whet everyone's appetite. And we have Susan in the Q&A asking, what are the demographics of non-drivers in urban and rural Wisconsin? David, do you want to kick us off just for a minute here while we're waiting on tech issues?
Yeah, there isn't in terms of measure of non-drivers, it's not something that's probably tracked either, and certainly at the level of the Census Bureau. Yeah, I mean there is data on households that have no vehicle available, and I was just making some quick calculations here. It looks like in urban areas, um, yeah, in urban areas, about 3% of people have no access to a vehicle, but in rural areas, it's about 2%. So that I'm sorry, that doesn't really get quite to Susan's question of how many people might be drivers versus non-drivers, but um, in terms of people have no access to a vehicle at all, the percentage in rural areas is actually a little bit lower, which probably should not surprise us. And one thing about data in Wisconsin is a lot of it gets, in particular urban areas, it gets skewed by Milwaukee. Where there a lot of people don't have vehicles there, and it's a big urban setting. That's why vehicle counts, either per capita or just the availability of vehicles to households is a little bit higher in urban areas than rural areas in the state.
Thank you so much, David. And while we're still working on things with Sarah, perhaps Mike, you can take up very quickly, briefly, the issue of, people who have access to cars and driver's licenses and how many people are choosing to drive and not. You notice anything?
Well, one of the things I've been told many times by Latino populations is that a huge issue for them is for those who are immigrants, maybe undocumented, is getting driver's licenses because they desperately need that in order to get to jobs. And have often been unable to get licenses if they're undocumented. But most people have no choice but to drive in rural areas. And I was actually being sent to the feed mill when I was only 13 or 14 years old. I was driving well before I had a driver's license because that's just the way country life is. And there's not mass transit. There aren't buses. There's not anything like that. So there's just no way to get around in a very spread out area unless you've got a car or a truck. And so that's just a fundamental feature of rural life.
Thank you so much, Mike. All right, I think we're going to try with Sarah on the phone. Let's make a test here and cross our fingers.
Okay, I am calling in from 920. How's that working?
I'm hearing you loud and clear. Let's go for it, Sarah.
I'm so sorry, but this is perhaps very, just shows us what it's all about. I guess like one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is just the way that we make connections, with our neighbors, with our communities, both in the places that we live, whether they may be demographically urban or demographically rural. I was struck back in 2017 when there was a lot of debriefing and thinking about what happened in the 2016 election. And, you had a lot of coastal journalists coming out to Wisconsin to say what happened. Big parts of the western part of our state switched from, like Obama voters to Trump voters. And there was a great Politico magazine article that appeared in January, February 2017 by Michael Kruse, Kruse. And he was interviewing a woman, I think she was in Pepin County, Wisconsin. And she was talking about the fact that she didn't quite know on the day after the election, like how she was going to greet her neighbor who she knew had voted for Trump, and she had not voted for Trump, had voted for Clinton, and she was just really not sure. And the coastal journalist said, well, why do you even have to talk to him? And she said, well, I buy hay from him for my sheep. And he said, well, why don't you just buy your hay from somebody else? And she said, oh, I don't think you understand. It's beautiful hay. It's dry, it's grassy, it's got just a little bit of clover in it. It's perfect hay. And I was so struck by that because I do sometimes think that as we live in rural areas, we are interacting with our neighbors, not just on a social level, but often in sort of economic transactions. They often in Wisconsin may have to do with agriculture. And that gives us like an opportunity to meet people and have to kind of maybe get beyond some potential political divides because we need to buy our hay from them and they might have perfect hay. And so I really kind of encourage us, especially in Wisconsin, we have some really great opportunities when we think about building out our local and regional food systems, whether it be at farmers markets or in more like aggregated opportunities. I work with the Wisconsin Food Hub Cooperative, which is about vegetable farmers from across the state, like figuring out how to get their vegetables together and get them on a truck to go to the Kroger Roundy's grocery store distribution center in Oconomowoc. And so I encourage us to kind of think about ways that both the social and the economic can provide opportunities for us to get to know each other. And the benefit of the looking at food systems is it's often quite tasty too, because we still produce food and good things here in Wisconsin. And so, part of the work that I do at the university is really trying to think about how these connections from the farm fields through processing and distribution, and then to some place that someone would buy that food, and then where they're going to take it and eat it, and we thinking about what the social opportunities are there. And there's other great opportunities. I work with Worm Farm Institute. I don't know if any of the folks on the line here have experienced the Farm Art Detour, which was a went on for several years, where people could drive around the countryside and experience the beautiful working lands. But Worm Farm set up what they call a rural urban flow in collaboration with a Milwaukee organization called The Table. And some of you may have been to Alice's Garden in Milwaukee and know this. And the rural urban flow is actually about kind of rejecting the idea of a rural urban divide. And I think, as Mike pointed out, kind of rejecting that mythology that there is this divide, and in fact, we have more in common, and let's figure out how to celebrate what we have in common and get to know each other. And so the rural urban flow has been about kind of getting an exchange going between folks from Sauk County and folks from Milwaukee, and meeting farmers and gardeners and artists and makers and getting them together in a regular exchange, so that we can push back against what the artificial divides that are created that often get in the way of us finding good solutions that are good for our communities. And so, I really encourage folks to check out opportunities like the Rural Urban Flow. I know that I suggested, and the League put it in the resource guide that was prepared for tonight. So, check that out. And the other thing is that I think in this tendency that we often have to want to make, rural counties are red counties, urban counties are blue counties, when in fact, if you look below the surface, they're purple or shades of purple, is, just thinking about like, what are these things that are hitting all of our communities. Mike mentioned healthcare and access to affordable healthcare as something that goes across our communities. I think that a really important issue that is going across the rural-urban continuum is that issue of who has control of the economy. We see really intense consolidation and monopoly power in our agriculture and food systems, and that impacts farmers' ability to make a living because the costs of their seed and their fertilizer and any inputs they have is going up, 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 at the same time that they're getting paid less and less for their milk or their corn or their soybeans or their kale, for that matter. And then as a consumer, if you live in an urban or rural place, as an eater, you also then are hit with higher prices and perhaps less access or choice of things because those products are coming from increasingly consolidated retailers, if you think about the Walmarts of the world. And so I do think that if we want to kind of pick some issues that we can rally around together, it is really looking at this economic power in our food system, and that we can, come together across these kind of demographic differences and rebuild a culture of community. And again, like I said, it could be tasty too, because it's about food and we have really good food. So that's kind of a lot what I think about, but that doesn't come easy. It comes, it takes time and effort to listen and learn and understand where everybody's coming from. But the good news is in Wisconsin, we have a lot of opportunities still in that area. And so I would just encourage folks to look for those opportunities. I joked a lot with Michael Bell, is a professor that I worked with over the years at UW, and we laughed and thought about, well, what if like the next time David gives a presentation, he has like graphs and charts by county of like how many potlucks are going on in those counties, because that would be the indicator of like social health and social wealth, and we probably could do that. So I just encourage us to think about those ways of coming together. But there are powerful interests that do not want us to come together and appreciate the mythology of the divide. And so it's upon us to kind of break through that. So I'll wrap it up there. I think I'd be really excited to get into some conversation with the Q&A and with the panelists. I appreciate you tolerating my technical problems. So I'm glad that I maybe got through a little bit here at the end. So thanks to the League of Women Voters for having me on.
Sarah, thank you so much. I'm so grateful that we could hear you loud and clear. That was such a great presentation. I wrote down demography of potlucks. I think someone needs to pick up that research. Hey, maybe it's someone who's right here with us today. So thank you so much, Sarah. I also wanted to give a shout out to the Farm Art Detour by the Worm Farm Institute. They did it for many years, including my first year in Wisconsin, or my first Farm Art Detour in 2016. I feel really gave me an introduction to the state like nothing else. So, if you want to find interesting things going on in our rural spaces, the Worm Farm Institute is an amazing organization to follow. So thank you so much again, Sarah. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, David, all of our panelists. And we'll be moving now into the Q&A, the official Q&A. And we appreciate, Susan, for you submitting that early question that we could begin to answer. There is still time. So if you would like to put a question in the Q&A, that's going to be at the bottom center left of your Zoom screen. And if you put it there, that will help us to see and keep track. Things in our chat get a little bit lost on the panelist side of things. So if it goes in the Q&A, we're bound to see it. So let's start with Kathleen Fullen, who says, my understanding is that Kathy Kramer documented in her book, The Politics of Resentment, that rural areas receive more tax dollars per capita than urban ones. So it is unclear to me how to better communicate this reality to people who feel they are underserved by government. I'll leave it to the panelists, maybe if there's someone who wants to jump in on this first.
Well, I do want to offer one word of caution. Now I've actually done presentations jointly with Kathy Kramer on a number of occasions, and Kathy's book is outstanding, and I highly recommend it. But one word of caution, and it cuts to what I was saying before about how there's no power company that would go to the expense of stringing power lines down every back road to get to every farmhouse and every barn just to pick up a few extra customers. When you look at per capita spending, you got to take into account that rural areas are sparsely populated, and so to build basic infrastructure to make anything available to people in rural areas is going to cost more per capita because there are fewer people. Now you could argue, well, for efficiency's sake, everybody should live in concentrated urban areas, but you've got a lot of urban people who decide that they want to get out of those areas and have a little bit more breathing room, and they move out to rural communities. So yes, there's that point that rural areas may receive more tax dollars per capita, but do keep in mind the dynamics of rural communities make it just more expensive per capita to provide anything.
Thanks, Mike. Is there another panelist who'd like to chime in?
Yeah, I agree with Mike. I think that's a really good point. And that the other thing that I would think about too is that now I've lost my train of thought because I was worried you weren't hearing me. Damn this
We're hearing you
technology.
loud and clear, and we'll give you plenty of time to collect your thoughts.
I had a great idea about the issue of resources. Well, and I think the reality may be in how you're counting the dollars, that by some ways of measuring that rural areas get more money or more per capita, but the idea of like that, then we need to communicate that so they get their reality. I think that's kind of the issue, because it's not that there's an information deficit necessarily. It's not that if you told a rural person that maybe votes differently than you do, that you get more education spending per capita or whatever it might be, that they'll say, oh, you're right. I think the veil has been lifted from my eyes. I think it's more about this question of like meeting people where they are, listening to understand the way that they're perceiving their own reality, even if it doesn't maybe always match up with David's graphs and charts, but allowing space for us to get into community and conversation with each other. And that's the thing that's hard and takes time.
All right, we can move on to our next question. Richard Russell says, 3 things that all people everywhere on Earth have in common is the need for clean water, adequate nutritious food, and unpolluted air. Is there some way we can build on those common interests to bring people together more effectively?
Let me just say that when elected officials have been willing to speak powerfully to providing access to all of those kinds of things in both rural and urban communities, and they're not parochial about their messaging. They're not simply speaking to a city audience or to a rural audience, but they're speaking across those boundaries. And when they understand that meeting those needs requires different approaches sometimes between rural and urban communities, because like I said before, the problems manifest themselves differently in different areas. Healthcare access is a big problem in urban areas, but the one problem that cities don't have is the absence of hospitals, for example. But in rural communities, they're losing their hospitals, and if you get sick enough to belong in the hospital, you don't have one in your community, and sometimes there's not one in the next community over either, and you have to travel a long way to get to the hospital. So that's the problem facing rural folks. And I think when you have people who can speak to these problems in a way that shows that they understand the differences in the way these challenges manifest themselves in rural and urban communities, that's when I think there's a real possibility to bring people together on a statewide, if not national, kind of campaign. And I brought up rural electrification as an example ages ago, generations ago, where having electricity was important for every American, but there's no way that the private power companies would have delivered it to every American unless there was this national campaign, and the REA was created to make sure it got everywhere, and it was. We need to replicate that kind of approach, I think, in our age, in our day and time, and if we do that, dealing with 21st century challenges, I think there's great potential to begin to unite people again. But if we think parochially, it's going to be a tough haul.
And if I may follow up, something that has come to mind for me, I believe it was from a New York Times story on data centers, but there was an interview with a man from Indiana who basically said, I don't care if you're liberal, conservative, urban, rural. I really don't care if you're against data centers. I'm with you. And I thought that's very interesting. Are there thoughts on data centers as kind of a uniting force for urban and rural communities? I see some nods.
I don't
Yeah,
want
I think
Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, I'll jump in. Yeah, I mean, it is sort of, it is sad that that could be the common villain, but I do think that we all need to stand up together and really ask, what for? What are these data centers for that have the risk to our natural resources? And, in the same way that I think we can ask any of the economic any kind of development, it's like, who is going to benefit from that? And so data centers have come on the scene really fast and furious. And I've been very proud of the communities that have stood up. And I do think that this could be an issue that can bring people together. So I think, looking for those common villains, and then also looking for those bright spots that we can come together around and have some fun together while we're fighting the common villains.
Thank you for that question.
Well, if I could jump in quickly
course.
on Sarah's question, what for or who's it for? That's such an important question. And I think whether you're rural or urban, I think a lot of people have answered that question. You're building these things and it's going to consume immense amounts of water, which we all need. It's going to consume immense amounts of electricity, which we all need. And what's it for? It's to power technology that a lot of people think is just coming after their job and their way of life. And so, yes, that is a common concern between rural and urban people, because everybody's looking at this stuff and saying, yeah, there's probably some spectacular benefits that are going to come from AI and all this technology. But am I going to be able to have a job? Am I going to be able to make a living? Or is all of that going to be technologized out of existence? That's a common fear, whether you live in the country or in the city. And so, yes, that's an issue that has immense unifying potential.
Thank you for that question, Richard. We have a question from Helen. Is it important for rural and urban people to communicate with each other? If so, what mechanisms are available to make those connections? So I see this as a practical question for our panelists about how can urban and rural people basically be hearing from each other more often?
Sarah, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I mentioned the specific initiative of the rural urban flow. I know that I was very impressed with some of the work that was done up in like Bayfield County around threats to Lake Superior and the water quality and quantity there. That was really also trying to connect with the urban and suburban people that maybe travel as tourists to these areas to take advantage of the beautiful nature. And I think maybe, that's another place where we mix a lot in Wisconsin. If you think about the northern lakes, I live outside the Wisconsin Dells. I'm mixing with a lot of Illinois people all the time coming from the big city. And so, figuring out the places, and with summer coming up, I think there's opportunities with outdoor festivals, with, ways of coming together, perhaps around more fun and social events, but taking some extra time to look around us and get to know the people around us, even if maybe they're coming from a different place. So I definitely think that that's a way for us to interact across this continuum of rural and urban. And, folks should feel free to replicate things like rural urban flow or get involved with rural urban flow.
Thank you, Helen, for the question. I'm going to jump ahead a bit here so we could touch on a little bit of demography. I wonder, David, if you might have a thought on this one. Karen Michael asks, did COVID and the ability to work virtually have an effect on rural populations?
Yeah, actually, I didn't have time to bring that up in my presentation talking about educational attainment, but yeah, I was curious and did happen to look that up. So, there was this impression during COVID that people were, fleeing to the hills, so to speak, and moving to rural climes away from cities. But when you look at things at a large scale, actually, there wasn't that much difference between urban and rural populations. And so I looked at 2019, the year before COVID began, and then 2024, the most recent year that the Census Bureau has data from its surveys. And in urban areas, the percentage of people with a four-year degree or higher went up about 4%. In rural areas, the percentage of people with a four-year degree or higher went up 3%. So there really wasn't, even though anecdotally it seemed like this was happening. It turned out in the long run, over the wash of about 5 years, that there wasn't that much of an uptick in people with greater educational attainment moving to rural areas.
Thank you, David. Any other thoughts from the panelists on COVID and rural populations? Barring that, we can move ahead. Oh, Sarah?
Well, I was just going to say that, I was thinking about that when we were kicking off the panel of just, in a way, COVID sort of being
Sarah,
able to do more remote. Oh, no.
I just heard you again. It's okay. COVID enabled people to
Okay.
do more remote work, I think is what we heard.
Yes. And so then if you think about the ways that kind of set some of these binary rural urban things on their ear because people were mixing across this supposed divide with their remote work. Now, so if you talk to people in Door County, they'll talk about all the people that moved up to Door County to do remote work and squeezed the original, more rural residents perhaps out of places. And maybe that's resetting itself now. I'd be interested what David might know about, to how much that is shifting back and forth. But, was that freedom that people had to move their bodies from an urban space to a rural space, but still do work in urban places, is that a freeing event? Or are we still separating ourselves perhaps across more economic lines? Because perhaps hooks their remote work laptop up to hopefully an internet that works better than mine, that they are bringing a different economic class with them that maybe isn't as malleable into the people that live locally. So I think it brings up lots of questions, and I see them in the Q&A of like, well, how can we really get to know each other? Like, what are the mechanisms? Where are those third spaces that people talk about where people would actually mix? And I think that's something we need to rebuild those spaces because we've lost a lot of them. If you think about churches and schools and different places where people might mix across supposed places of difference. So I think that's on us to rebuild the mixing places.
Thank you for that answer, and thank you too for the question from Karen. Um, I'm going to pass this one immediately to Mike because you did bring this up in your presentation, Mike. Olivia Layton asks, speaking about candidates such as Obama and Baldwin, how have historical candidates succeeded in appealing to both rural and urban populations?
Well, Obama's an example of somebody who was seen by both city folk and rural residents as as not being part of the, he ran against Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primary, and she was sort of the epitome of the political establishment. He was seen as the change agent. He was seen as the person who was going to upset some apple carts, and there are a lot of people in the country who just wanted something different. And what we've seen is that is in our politics is that elections have been very rough on incumbents in recent elections. The people in power are having a hard time getting reelected. We've seen a Democrat elected in one presidential election, then a Republican, then a Democrat, then a Republican, because the country's frustrated and they just want change. And Obama was a reflection of that. So I don't think rural people were thinking about his race at all. They were just thinking about this message of change and hope, and they were hoping and praying. They had their fingers crossed that he would bring about some significant change in our country. When it didn't happen fast enough or wasn't significant enough, they were willing to cast their lot with somebody like Trump. And then after 4 years of Trump, they tried Biden, and then after 4 years of Biden, they go back to Trump. It's just that people, I think rural populations are exasperated, as so many Americans are, regardless of where they live, and a lot of politicians are tone deaf to those frustrations, and they aren't really connecting with what Americans are struggling with on a daily basis, because their lives are so disconnected from regular American life. The circles they run in, the people that they rub elbows with, have such different lives than the lives of working class Americans. So I think the real key is people who have an innate sense of what it's like to be working class and what it's like to struggle with the things that so many people are tormented by. And when an official, regardless of party, regardless of race, regardless of gender, when a candidate can speak powerfully to those concerns, they will find that their message will resonate with rural and urban voters, and it will span divides. Keep in mind that that Bernie Sanders once won 71 out of 72 counties in a primary election here in Wisconsin, and a lot of people would have said that rural counties would have been spooked by somebody who calls himself a democratic socialist, yet he won 71 out of the 72 counties. So that speaks to Sarah's earlier point that don't fall into this trap that because one county did vote Republican in an election, that means everybody there is Republican. These counties are various shades of purple, and there are lots of Democrats living in these so-called red counties, and there are lots of independents, and somebody with the right message can connect with those people. I think one of the great mistakes Democrats have made in recent years is they stopped campaigning everywhere, and they kind of wrote rural Wisconsin off. That was a huge mistake because rural Wisconsin used to vote for Democrats and will again someday, but only if Democrats go out there and fight for those votes.
All right, we're going to do kind of a lightning round because I want to squeeze in two more questions. David, I'm going to punt this one to you. It's a question from Casey Kostiak. Do you see the potential for more movement of the boomer generation from rural to urban areas to access transit and medical care as they age, or to be closer to grandchildren?
Yeah, actually, that has been going on for decades. It's a very common process that, and particularly in Wisconsin, a lot of people, they have their working careers down in the more populous areas like Madison and the Milwaukee metro areas during their careers. They retire, they move up north. Maybe, they've had a family cabin or cottage that they've now winterized, or they built a new home or bought a new home up north. And it's been a long pattern of seeing sort of the metro counties in the South losing some population to migration, starting about age 60 up through 75, maybe up through 80, and a surge in those people in northern counties, but then the process reverses. Just anecdotally, a lot of the evidence is, one spouse passes away. And quite often the man, as men tend to die earlier than women. And so mom has to move back, in order to have like family supports, moves back down to places like Waukesha County, or the Madison area. And again, as Mike pointed out, another problem though also is that there isn't that access to healthcare options in the rural parts of the state. There aren't the continuum of care facilities, for example, up north that would be available in Madison or Milwaukee, excuse me, Milwaukee, Waukesha area. So that pattern has been going on and will likely continue. Again, and it points to the issue though of how much more or better, continuum of care could be seen in more rural areas, which would allow or support people to continue to live in those areas.
Thank you, David. And this is truly lightning round. I wish we could have gotten to everyone's questions. Thank you so much to all who attended, to all who asked questions. And I apologize we didn't get quite to everything. We did the best that we could, but I would like to hear a final word, and I do mean a word, about 10 seconds from each of you, starting with Sarah. Just next steps, final thoughts for people to move on and take the energy from tonight and do something about it.
Yes. Well, I hope that everyone will go out and find a pie social or a potluck to attend, and maybe invite someone that lives in a different geography than you do. That's my plan.
Thanks, Sarah. Mike?
Here to that. But I also would share one final thought. Everybody's got one of these, and I'm not so concerned about when we connect or how we interact when we do connect, but how we talk about each other when we're not together. Because we've all got one of these, and people film stuff and they post it online. Well, rural people see what urban people are saying about them, and vice versa. Urban people hear what rural people are saying about them. And when we fall into the trap of believing a lot of the mythology, and when we echo all the misconceptions, people see it online, and it creates more mistrust. And so we got to be careful about how we talk about each other when we're not together.
Thank you, Mike. And David, last thoughts before we turn back to Marty and conclude the program.
Sure, yeah, and I guess one thing I mentioned, and I'll re-mention, is that and as you're reading, I'm a data wonk, and so I'm constantly buried in quantitative data. But as you're reading or listening to podcasts or other media about when they're talking about rural populations versus urban, really just think about, okay, who is it that they're actually talking about? And try to keep sort of distinctions like that in mind. So that's what I can say just in conclusion.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. A big round of silent applause from all of our attendees today. And we'll turn it back to Martha. Thanks everyone for coming out.
Thank you all for attending this program, and thank you so much for your speakers for sharing all of your wisdom. We hope this program has not only informed you, but empowered you to be an active citizen in our community. A recording of this event will be posted on our website in about a week. If you'd like to learn more about the topic, please consult our research guide. You'll find this on our website on the same page that you registered for this program. Next slide. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of the league members who've contributed to organizing this forum. Your time, expertise, and passion have made today's forum possible. Thank you. Slide. I want to remind our league members there's many more activities for you to get involved coming up, including registering for the local or state annual meetings, as well as the national convention. Those registrations are closing soon. Please register. Next slide. Please be aware that a week from now on Monday, May 18th, there will be a discussion about this forum that all participants are welcome to join. You can register for this virtual event on the same page that you registered for this program. And we recommend that everyone who attends this program join so that you can have your say in the discussion. Next slide. Most importantly, whether or not you're a league member, we encourage you, please make your voice heard. Participate in our democracy by voting. Our democracy is counting on you. Thank you very much for attending the League of Women Voters Forum on connecting rural and urban communities. Thank you.